Good afternoon. My name is Corey Bulman, and I'm a student in advanced research, and I'm here to talk about the specifics for Journal 1 of Week 1. This week we were asked to read Keeping and Using Reflective Journals in Qualitative Research by Michelle Ortlip, and we were supposed to talk about social change in our Walden work. I thought the article was very interesting, and I thought I would point out a couple of things that I thought were really interesting in what the doctor had to say. First, in terms of dealing with the idea of bias, Professor Orlip says this: "My concern relates to what Denzin, 1994, refers to as the interpretive crisis in qualitative research. The debate about the problem of bias in qualitative research remains unsolved. There's a lack of agreement on the amount and type of research influence that is acceptable, and whether and how it needs to be controlled and accounted for." I thought this was very interesting because this is an issue that I've thought about in terms of my topic as well, because I'm writing about social emotional learning and teachers, and I've been an English teacher for 24 years. And so I've thought a lot about bias and how I don't want to go in tipping the scales and allowing my biases to come out in terms of investigating what English teachers think is important about social emotional learning, or where they see the limitations of social emotional learning in terms of implementing it into their classrooms at a time in the United States when a lot of legislation is coming forward in certain states wanting to limit the use of social emotional learning. I have to be really careful with the way that I write semi-structured interview questions so that I'm not trying to tip the scales and showing my research bias. I also have to be aware of what happens when I have if or when I have a relationship with anybody, even tangentially, that's associated with English teachers in terms of my population of participants. Um, I thought that the article also had this interesting take on the instrumentation of data collection in qualitative research. My research project is primarily interview based, and therefore I am the main instrument of data collection. I've thought about this a lot, as well as I've thought about undertaking qualitative research to look at social emotional learning in teachers, that I have to be the instrument. Therefore, I have to know my biases in order to not let them overwhelm the study and thus make my data invalid. Um, I liked that she talked about the effects of critical reflection on research design. I thought it was really interesting when she talked about keeping that journal along the way, and that it had concrete impacts on the way that she decided to design her study and interpret her data. I thought that was a really important point that was brought up. And part of the reason I think that this is important is when we go back to Walden's focus on social change. We were supposed to give our interpretation of this particular quote. "Rapid social change and the resulting diversification of life worlds are increasingly confronting social researchers with a new social context and perspectives. Thus, research is increasingly forced to make use of inductive strategies instead of starting from theories and testing them. Knowledge and practice are studies as local knowledge and practices," by Flick, 2002. I thought this was really interesting as well, that you can't come with any presuppositions that because you come in with a level of knowledge that you're not going to let your biases get involved, and that ultimately would impede your desire for social change. I have always been a big believer in Walden's position on social change, and I want to interact with and enter the conversation in terms of social emotional learning and what has to do with language arts teachers today. But I also know that I have to understand my role so that I don't make decisions that impede me from actually entering into that conversation as a researcher instead of just a cheerleader that advocates for my profession. I was lucky enough to serve as the state teacher of the year, and in that capacity, I was a cheerleader for my profession. I'm putting on a researcher hat now, and I have to look at this much more objectively. So I have to make sure that I'm aligning all of my research, my problem, my proposal, my questions, my data instrumentation, and my data analysis, so that I'm actually doing research that will enter into the conversation and move social change forward versus just being an advocate for education. I do see those two things as different. And I think as a researcher, I can advocate for education, but in this particular role, I won't be advocating for particular positions. The research has to lead to the conclusions that it leads to. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye.